I don't really remember anything about the Beatle days. It seems like a sort of, previous incarnation.
We knew him as the quiet one, the spiritual Beatle, the man who sang of My Sweet Lord and the simple beauty of Here Comes the Sun. To the world, George Harrison was a man who cultivated peace, tended his garden, and sought a reality beyond the material world. But even a man devoted to finding inner calm has his limits, and one man pushed George Harrison right over the edge. He pushed him so far that Harrison, a man who once told his friend Tom Petty there was nothing to be gained from hatred, came to despise his former friend with a shocking intensity. This isn't a story about musical differences or creative squabbles. This is a story of profound personal betrayal, a friendship shattered by greed, and a staggering financial deception that cost George Harrison millions and something far more valuable, his trust in a man he once called family. After the hurricane of Beatlemania finally died down, each of the Fab Four had to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives. For George Harrison, this was a moment of pure creative freedom. He was no longer stuck with only 1 or 2 songs per album, overshadowed by the Lennon-McCartney machine. He was free. His 1970 triple album, All Things Must Pass, was a monumental statement, a flood of brilliant songs he'd been stockpiling for years. It was a massive success that proved he was a powerful artist in his own right. Publicly, Harrison was the seeker. He'd led the Beatles to India, introduced the world to the Maharishi, and his music was soaked in Hindu philosophy. He organized the groundbreaking concert for Bangladesh, the first real rock benefit concert, setting the stage for decades of artist-led charity. He just seemed to operate on a higher plane, above the petty drama of the rock and roll world. But the business side of that world is impossible to escape. The Beatles' breakup was a legal nightmare, especially with their controversial manager Alan Klein. By 1973, Harrison was desperate to get out of that mess for good. He needed someone new, someone sharp, trustworthy, and who understood the complicated world of international finance. He found that man through a recommendation from his friend, actor Peter Sellers. His name was Dennis O'Brien, and at first, he seemed like the answer to all of George's prayers. Dennis O'Brien was a sharp, sophisticated American lawyer with a background at the prestigious Rothschild banking group in London. He had a reputation as a financial wizard, a guy who could navigate the maze of tax laws and investments that baffled most artists. He'd already sorted out Peter Sellers' own complicated finances, which made him look pretty good to Harrison. Their first meeting was a huge success. The CVIA 2 just clicked. Harrison was blown away by how quickly O'Brien could understand complex financial documents. In 20 minutes, he gets more from a budget sheet than most people do in 20 hours, George once marveled. O'Brien was equally impressed with Harrison, seeing past the rock star stereotype. The chairman of Shell, of RTZ, of IBM, of Ford, I've met all these people, O'Brien later recalled, and I've never met anyone as together as George. It felt like a perfect match. Harrison, the creative genius, had found his down-to-earth, business-savvy partner. O'Brien officially became Harrison's business manager in 1973, and their relationship quickly became more than just professional. O'Brien and his family became close friends with George, his wife Olivia, and their son Donnie. They were frequent guests at Friar Park, Harrison's magnificent Gothic estate, and became part of his inner circle. For a guy like George, who valued loyalty and real connection, this friendship was just as important as any business contract. He'd finally found someone he thought he could trust completely, a total contrast to the toxic relationships that had defined the end of the Beatles. And that trust would soon become the foundation for one of the boldest and most artistically important ventures of Harrison's life. It was a project born not from a desire to make a profit, but from a simple act of friendship. And it would lead them both into the notoriously risky world of filmmaking, setting the stage for their greatest triumphs and their ultimate, bitter downfall. The year is 1978, and the Monty Python comedy troupe is in serious trouble. Their new movie, a religious satire called Life of Brian, is just days away from shooting when its main backer, EMI Films, suddenly pulls out. The company chairman had finally read the script and was horrified by what he saw as blasphemy, fearing a huge public backlash. With the cast and crew already on location in Tunisia, the whole production was about to collapse. In a panic, Python member Eric Idle called the richest person he knew, his friend, George Harrison. Harrison, a huge Python fan, read the script and absolutely loved it. He got what it was, a brilliant, hilarious satire, not some mean-spirited attack on faith. He asked his business manager, Dennis O'Brien, what he thought, and O'Brien came back with a wild idea. They should just finance the film themselves. It was an enormous risk. To raise the $4 million needed, Harrison had to remortgage his beloved Friar Park estate. O'Brien put up his London offices as collateral. Harrison later joked it was the most expensive cinema ticket ever issued. But his reason was simple. I wanted to see the movie. And just like that, Handmade Films was born. The name itself felt personal and unique, a world away from the Hollywood machine. The logo, a hand with film reel holders for knuckles, was even designed by Python's own Terry Gilliam. Life of Brian was, of course, a massive international hit, despite all the controversy. It launched Handmade Films as an exciting new force in British cinema. With George as the quiet, benevolent backer and O'Brien as the hands-on producer running the show, they had a winning formula. Their mission was to champion unique, often risky movies that the big studios wouldn't dare touch. Over the next decade, Handmade put out an astonishingly great slate of films. They rescued another movie from disaster, the gritty London gangster classic The Long Good Friday, which made a star out of Bob Hoskins. They backed Terry Gilliam's fantasy adventure Time Bandits, which became a surprise blockbuster in the US, making over $40 million on a tiny budget and securing the company's future. The hits just kept coming. There was The Missionary, with Michael Palin, Neil Jordan's moody noir, Mona Lisa, and the charming comedy, A Private Function. And maybe most famously, they produced the cult masterpiece, With Nail and I, a film that has become a cornerstone of British cinema. Harrison's passion project was helping to save the British film industry, and he was behind some of the most memorable movies of the 80s, even making little cameos here and there. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Harrison was living the dream, creating art he loved, all while his trusted friend handled the business. Their partnership was seen as a perfect model of how art and commerce could work together. But behind the scenes, a different story was starting to take shape. The foundation of trust that Handmade was built on was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to crack. At first, the success of Handmade Films was intoxicating. It seemed like George and Dennis had the Midas touch. But as the company grew, so did its ambitions, and this is where the partners' philosophies started to clash. George was happy for Handmade to stay small and personal, a boutique studio for unique, artist-driven films. He saw it as a hobby, a way to support creative people he believed in. O'Brien, however, saw things differently. He wasn't satisfied with being a quirky British production house. He wanted to crack the American market big time. He dreamed of turning Handmade into a major international player, competing with the Hollywood giants. This meant bigger budgets, more commercial movies, and a much more aggressive business strategy. To fuel this expansion, O'Brien started taking out huge bank loans. Now, that wasn't necessarily a problem for a growing film company. But here's the part George Harrison allegedly didn't know for years. The guarantees for those loans were dangerously lopsided. While Harrison believed they were equal partners, sharing both profits and risks, the reality was that his personal fortune was being used to guarantee the company's rising debts, while O'Brien himself was largely protected. In essence, George was the only one on the hook for O'Brien's increasingly risky bets. At the same time, O'Brien's management style was starting to alienate the very artists Handmade was supposed to be supporting. Terry Gilliam said that Dennis became more and more convinced that his ideas were better than our ideas. Bruce Robinson, the writer and director of With Nail and I, famously clashed with O'Brien, finding his interference so infuriating he threatened to quit his own film. Richard E. Grant, the star of With Nail, described O'Brien in his diaries as an incredibly tall, incredibly bald big noise from Handmade films, perfectly capturing the overbearing presence he had become. This was a complete betrayal of Handmade's original spirit. It was no longer a haven for artists, but a company driven by one man's ego. George, often busy with his music, was mostly detached from the day-to-day operations, putting all his faith in his partner. He later admitted that as the 80s went on, he often didn't even like the script or the film the company was making, but he didn't want to cause trouble. He trusted Dennis. The breaking point came in the mid to late 80s. O'Brien's push for a Hollywood blockbuster led to a string of disasters. The most infamous was Shanghai Surprise, 1986, a big-budget film starring the celebrity couple of the moment, Madonna and Sean Penn. The movie was a critical and commercial catastrophe. This was followed by other flops, like the bizarrely titled Cold Dog Soup. These kinds of losses are devastating for an independent film company. The debt was piling up, and the banks were getting nervous. One lender, Barclays, ordered a full audit of Harrison's finances. The results would be a brutal wake-up call. At first, O'Brien shielded George from the bad news, hiring an accountant named John Rice to investigate. But Rice, along with Harrison's old friend Ray Cooper, soon discovered the horrifying truth. The problem wasn't just a few bad movies. The problem was Dennis O'Brien. When they tried to show their findings to Harrison, his reaction wasn't what they expected. Instead of getting angry at O'Brien, he got angry at them. He really didn't want to know, and he virtually threw us out, Race recalled. The idea that his close friend, his partner, a man he'd welcomed into his family, could be the source of it all was just too painful to even consider. It was a betrayal so deep he couldn't even look at it. But the evidence was mounting, and soon it would be impossible to ignore. That bank audit laid the truth bare in cold, hard numbers. The complicated web of loans and guarantees Dennis O'Brien had created was designed to benefit him at George Harrison's extreme expense. The accountant, John Reese, discovered Harrison wasn't a 50-50 partner in risk like he'd always believed. He was solely on the hook for the company's massive debts. He had personally signed guarantees for films and banks that O'Brien hadn't. The total deficit was staggering, around $20 million. An advisor bluntly told Harrison that if things continued, he would go bankrupt. The trust was shattered. The friendship was a lie. The man Harrison had brought into his home, the man his son Donnie knew as a family friend, had been systematically taking advantage of him for years. The pain of that realization was immense. This wasn't just business. It was a profound personal violation. The easygoing spiritual Beatle was now staring at the ugliest side of human nature, personified by a man he had loved. The fallout was immediate. In a fit of anger, Harrison tried to cut all ties with the company he'd founded. He sent a fax to the Handmade Films office in London, firing the staff and declaring he wanted nothing more to do with the company. It was a desperate act from a man who felt the ground crumbling beneath him. Handmade Films, his passion project, had become poison. The company effectively stopped operating in 1991 and was sold off to a Canadian company 3 years later. But for George, just walking away wasn't enough. The deception was too great. He wasn't just out millions of dollars. He had been deliberately defrauded. The quiet man was now ready to fight. In 1995, Harrison filed a $25 million lawsuit against Dennis O'Brien in Los Angeles. The suit alleged fraud and negligence, claiming O'Brien had effectively cheated him out of $16 million over 12 years. O'Brien's lawyers tried to get the case dismissed, but the judge refused, and the battle began. The legal proceedings were a painful public spectacle of a friendship's ugly end. The case came down to one core deception. Harrison and O'Brien were not equal partners. Harrison's lawyers showed that a 1978 agreement said O'Brien would cover half of any losses, a promise he had completely broken. After a year, the court found in Harrison's favor. In 1996, a judge ruled that O'Brien had indeed mismanaged the company and breached his duty to his partner, ordering him to pay Harrison $11 million. It was a clear legal victory. A spokesman for Harrison captured the bittersweet feeling, stating that while George was pleased, winning's one thing, collecting's another. Those words would turn out to be prophetic. Faced with a massive judgment, Dennis O'Brien filed for bankruptcy, a move designed to avoid paying the man he'd wronged. But Harrison, now fueled by a righteous anger, refused to give up. He pursued O'Brien into bankruptcy court. This final legal chapter, however, ended in frustration. In August 2001, just a few months before his death, the judge dismissed Harrison's case because his failing health kept him from appearing in court. The legal battle was over, but the emotional scars would never heal. This story is a powerful look at the struggles even our biggest idols face. It reveals a side of George Harrison that often gets overlooked, a man forced to fight for his principles against a deeply personal betrayal. If you find these hidden histories of music as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We're always uncovering stories you won't want to miss. The court victory, while a legal vindication, did little to heal the wound Dennis O'Brien had inflicted. The financial loss was huge, but it was the betrayal that cut the deepest. Eric Idle, who had unintentionally introduced the two, saw the change in George. He said Harrison felt bitter, betrayed, angry, and let down, and that he hated O'Brien with an intensity that was quite rare for George. He noted, "It took him a long time to get over all that." This was a shocking statement about a man who'd spent his life on a spiritual path that preached forgiveness and letting go of anger. Harrison himself once told Tom Petty there was nothing to gain from hatred. And yet, O'Brien had provoked a level of bitterness in him that was impossible to deny, a true testament to how severe the betrayal was. For an artist like Harrison, the most natural way to process that kind of emotion is through music. He channeled his rage into a song, a scathing takedown of his former friend. The track has become something of a legend among fans, though it was never officially released. Its rumored title says it all, Lion O'Brien. Those who claim to have heard it say it's a raw, direct expression of Harrison's feeling of being cheated and deceived. The very existence of this song, real or rumored, is a powerful symbol of the feud, a hidden track of fury in the discography of a spiritual man. The whole ordeal cast a long shadow over the final years of Harrison's life. He was already a private person, wary of the spotlight. But the experience with O'Brien solidified his distrust of the business world. It was a brutal lesson that in the world of fame and fortune, friendship can be a weapon and trust can be a weakness. The man who just wanted to help his friends make a funny movie ended up paying a price far greater than the mortgage on his home. Dennis O'Brien largely faded from public view after the lawsuits. He was eventually ousted from a bank he was president of in 1999 and moved back to the UK, where he passed away in a hospital in December 2021 at the age of 80. The legacy of Handmade films is complicated. On one hand, it represents a golden age of British cinema, a company that gave us a string of daring, original, and now classic films. It's a testament to George Harrison's great taste and his willingness to put his money where his heart was. On the other hand, it's a cautionary tale about how a dream born from passion can be corrupted by greed. The company's own story became as dramatic as any of the movies it produced. The lyrics Harrison wrote for the theme song to Time Bandits now seemed chillingly prophetic, a perfect commentary on the fate of his own company. Greedy feeling, wheeling dealing, losing what you won. See the dream come undone. George Harrison's life was full of contradictions. He was the quiet Beatle who wrote some of the band's most iconic songs, He was the global superstar who just wanted a private life of quiet contemplation. And he was the man who sang of peace and love, yet found himself in one of the most bitter personal feuds in music history. The story of his relationship with Dennis O'Brien isn't just a footnote in a rock star's biography. It's a tragic story about the vulnerability of trust. Harrison went into that partnership not as a cynical businessman, but as a friend. He thought O'Brien was someone who could handle the messy business stuff, freeing him up to focus on his art and his spiritual life. He gave his trust completely, and that trust was weaponized against him. The betrayal nearly bankrupted him, but the emotional cost was far greater. It forced a man who sought peace into years of ugly legal battles. It sparked a hatred so deep, it found its way into his art, in the unreleased, raw anger of Lion O'Brien. The saga of Handmade films is ultimately the story of a beautiful dream, a dream that started with saving life of Brian and ended in a nightmare of lawsuits and a shattered friendship. It reveals a side of George Harrison we rarely see, a man pushed to his absolute limit. It shows that even a soul dedicated to rising above the material world can be deeply wounded by its betrayals. In the end, George Harrison remained a spiritual seeker, a loving husband and father, and a brilliant musician. But the story of his war with Dennis O'Brien is a crucial part of his legacy. It's a stark reminder that the deepest cuts often come not from enemies, but from those you once called family.